everyone, and welcome to the Burgess podcast, the show where we are opening up conversations about life at sea, discussing hot topics within the industry, as well as offering mental health support and promoting well-being for crew. We also have our very own in-house recruitment team, so if you or anyone you know is currently looking for a new position, please send your updated CV to recruitment@burgessyachts.com or check out our recruitment posts on Instagram @Burgess Yacht Crew. As part of our series on diversity, we were really thrilled to have had the chance to sit down with Language Alchemist Tracey Jones. We had a really interesting chat on the topic of language and communication and why the language we use to each other is so important, especially when working in teams. Tracey has dedicated her career to helping people develop their communication skills, and it really highlighted to me the impact that poor communication can have on each of us. And so it was really great to talk through some useful tools which we can all use in our day-to-day lives. So how are you, Tracey?
Okay, I'm really well today, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, of course I can. So I'm a mind management coach that specialises in supporting individuals with various transitions in their life. And I've created a brand of coaching called Language Alchemy Coaching, where we've trademarked it as well. And my clients really range from working from ultra high net worth to sports to politician into the education, and only recently over the last 12 months with crew members. And when somebody said to me, one of the lawyers in London a couple of months ago said, gosh, you work across such a diverse group of people. And I remember saying to him that it's not the place of work, it's the person. So it's not the industry I work with, it's the person. And it's based on the understanding that we are all unique individuals and we each process life events in very different ways. And this is why mind management support is so effective, and it can be tailored to each individual to support them with struggles, the curveballs that they might be facing in life. And I work with my clients to educate them on how the mind processes specific information and why we think certain thoughts and the behaviours that manifest from these thoughts are all down to how we are neurologically wired. So working through the science of an individual's mind and through open dialogue and just informed discussions where I can challenge them and question them. And it enables my clients to understand how their mind works. And often I work within the habitual areas as well to unhook limiting beliefs and help my clients' lives just to live a life that's aligned to their values, because much of what we do is habitual, and studies by both neurobiologists and cognitive psychologists, they indicate that up from 40 to 95% of human behaviour, how we think and what we say, and our overactions falls into a habit category. So that's quite a tall amount. So just looking at people's behaviours and habits with their thought patterns and their words and the language they use, they can come from a lot of the programming that's quite limiting to people. So just giving them that safe space to work through that is really important.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating topic. So I mentioned earlier that this chat is part of our series on diversity, and you've kindly agreed to talk to us about language and communications and how language fits in with the topic of diversity. Why is the language that we use so important?
When we look at inclusive language, it's so important because it promotes that good mental health and that sense of belonging. It encourages also tolerance and acceptance, and the sensitivities towards differences within that equality, and it encourages all people to be themselves. But being aware of the power of language is not about being politically correct with things. It's about treating people with respect, dignity, and increasing awareness, especially on board the vessel when pressures are heightened and possibly after, long charters, long days in work. And if we are truly to demonstrate respect and understanding, fairness and tackle discrimination and exclusion, we can make sure that the language we use is consistent with those intentions. And this means not only avoiding words and phrases that offend, but also using language which is inclusive of supporting others too.
Definitely. So how does the language that we use affect our relations with others? How would it affect relations on board a yacht?
Oh, it all depends. When we look at our characters, the behaviors of different people, language is the tool we use to communicate with individuals and groups. And we use language as a means for expressing our thoughts and feelings. And when used well, it helps to form bonds. And when used carelessly, it can create division within those teams and the crew members. And based on the way the human brain is built, it is easier for someone to feel excluded rather than included, because often those thoughts are going to go back off into the negative, and often we think about what's not being done rather than what is being done. Humans are incredibly social. We want to feel that we belong to the group, but at the same time we're also wired to look for threats to our well-being. So if we detect even the slightest indicator that we could be left out, we feel it. And especially our sensitive members within the team are going to feel it a lot more. Some can just allow things to let go quite quickly, and others are more sensitive towards it. And when it comes to diversity, language can be a bridge for building relationships or a tool for creating and maintaining divisions across differences. Language has the power to inspire, change, and innovate, or gender hate and foster discrimination. So all communication has an impact on the recipient and may be remembered for a very long time. So it's good to encourage that trusted space when using language in the workplace and on board the vessel, and being aware that language is always evolving, and being able to seek continued learning or training on the meaning of words and what it means for you individually and how people self-identify can be great for personal development.
Yeah, and terminology is always changing, isn't it? So, it's a constantly evolving process. And, it can be quite hard, if we're all honest, to sometimes keep up with the terminology. But that's where we as individuals, I guess, need to just keep learning, keep reading, keep up to date, keep talking to each other. It's a constant learning process, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, there was a word that I was presented with last year, and it meant something completely different to me, but it meant something in the youth, that it meant something positive, it meant something funny, and I was like, what does that mean? And they went, oh, that means it's good, it's positive. And I was like, oh, but in my era, in the 70s, 80s, it meant something very different.
Yeah. And I guess, when we talk about the effect of our language, and, you mentioned earlier discrimination and bullying, is going to have an effect on someone's mental health. And you mentioned earlier how different personalities can deal with
Yeah.
things very differently. I'm a bit of a sulker, and I will go quiet. I won't voice my discontent. I will just internalize it, which means that somebody else may not know that they've actually upset me. So it's very easy to think that it's okay to use that language, but actually it's just being mindful of, the people that you're talking to and how it's received.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why having really open and honest communications when a team is brought together, it's great. We do like lots of work around building that team up to start with. What are our behaviors, our characteristics, our core values, and understanding each other from that onset can minimize conflict within the workplace. Whilst using these words, then people start to understand a lot more. I used to be very sensitive, and I would be very sensitive when people would say something or maybe not say something. And I'd carry it and I would hold it. And I remember that happening in my first role, where there was a lady in the workplace. She just didn't speak to me in the mornings. And I internalized it throughout the day. I'd be very sensitive. But then I realized that she just wasn't good in the mornings and she didn't like to speak to people in the mornings. So once I understood that, but it took me a number of weeks to really understand that because I was new in this specific workplace. So I think
Yeah.
watching, observing, learning from each other and learning each other's mannerisms and behaviors is quite important for us not to maybe take things at face value, take things to heart, and keeping that open communication.
So I'm interested what advice you'd give to both the existing team plus the new crew member who joins a yacht, how to integrate into that space. For a new crew member joining an already close unit, it's already quite difficult. If you are from a diverse background, is that harder, especially if the existing crew are not used to being mindful of the language that they're using?
Yeah. And again, I mean, for us, we really do encourage people to have those amazing conversations together because, you know, that you are part of a very tight family. And some of the crew members I've worked with previously, when I see the smaller teams together, there might be just 6 of them on the vessel. That's even, you know, it's so important to be able to just really understand each other's boundaries, understand what's important for each other, having those open and communication, but understanding yourself as well, I think, before going into these situations and really holding the mirror up at ourselves and understanding, okay, so what is it about what triggers me? What is it about language that I could become triggered by? Is it my trigger rather than taking it personally from what somebody else has said? Because if I do have somebody on board that maybe isn't really understanding the diversity of language and inclusivity, what are my next steps? And that's just sitting in it. You know, am I prepared to let it go? Am I prepared to support them and help them and educate them on it and have a really lovely discussion around it? Can I coach them and ask them questions? Because sometimes and often we find that others are oblivious to that language and how it impacts others. And, you know, when we think about patterns of exclusion, you know, and hurt, you know, being mindful when communicating with others as well is just looking at, you know, what body language, you know, how does that affect others and how do people perceive us? And it's an important aspect of communication. And many people don't understand that as we convey messages and emotions that may not be expressed through words alone. In fact, studies have shown that body language can account for up to 55% of messages' perceived meaning, and with tone of voice accounting for 38% and actual words accounting for only 7%. Now, when we think about people walking into a room, quite often we know their mood that they might be in because we can see it. You know, when we hear people say, oh, you could feel the atmosphere change when they walked into the room. Now, your sensitive crew members are going to hold on to that and they're going to feel that. That person might not have said something. Their body language might have just been enough for them to start to question, oh, are they okay? What's going on? And start to maybe take that personally. So it's been very mindful on both ways too.
Yeah. So what about other communication? You know, we talked about body language. There are other methods of communication or that we need to be mindful of, such as language barriers. Obviously, on a very diverse yacht, language barriers is going to be quite key to bear in mind.
Yeah, and you know, excluding people who don't speak prime language of the yacht crew, sometimes that language barrier can have an impact in creating an environment where employees who aren't native English speakers feel like that they can ask for clarification without ridiculed, you know, just making sure that we can have those dialogues again. And, you know, banter can have an important role in cementing a sense of community and camaraderie, but banter can easily turn into form of maybe sometimes bullying when the teasing remarks can cause offence. And it's just understanding those boundaries and how far we can take that banter, or if the person feels they have no choice but to accept or participate in the conduct of other banters just to keep their job sometimes. And banter may affect someone by association. You know, for example, if two people are sharing a sexist joke maybe between them, they're still creating a hostile work environment, you know, for anyone who can hear their conversation and maybe find that offensive. So keeping each other in the loop about, you know, what you find amusing gives us all the chance of understanding how we may cause offence and learn how to avoid this in the future. But again, ensuring that when we are having those open dialogues, that it's coming from a good place as well, and ensuring that when we are having those dialogues, that our tonality and the way we express that also doesn't come across as too rude, maybe too bullish. And that I think is quite important as well.
Banter's a huge one, isn't it? I mean, banter is everywhere, you know, in offices, on yachts. But I maybe naively like to think that banter never comes from a place of wanting to upset somebody. It's just what somebody perceives as innocent fun.
Mm.
but we need to be more sensitive to the people who can hear, that it can trigger mental health issues from a previous incident when that person heard this. It's such a historical thing and all encompassing, isn't it?
Yes, and that's so true that it can trigger. I see this often. I really do see this often. And I've only over the last few weeks worked with some crew members on a one-to-one basis with this. And it was in a heightened environment where there was pressures. They'd been on the boat for a number of weeks together. And, some of the derogatory terms have been used, and it was really heightening a few of the crew members on board, and it caused a lot of conflict.
Yeah. And derogatory terms, obviously, in the topic of diversity, some of the terminology that is used is derogatory, whether it's intentional or not. And crew people need to learn the language that they're using, what it can mean to some people.
And it's been very respectful as well, isn't it? And I think
Absolutely, yeah.
and it's having those, coming back again to having those open and honest dialogues, maybe setting the boundaries right from the onset. If you're a new team together, what does that look like at the start? And then unhooking these as we go along, in real time, but being able to have just a discussion without the emotion attached to it. Because if we are triggered by some of these derogatory terms, of the banter's gone too far, for the person that's giving the banter, they might not think that anything's wrong, but the person receiving it is finding those boundaries as well, being able to do it in that respectful manner and being able to do it where the boundaries are set.
So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself or asking you to repeat yourself, but when you flag banter, the instinctive reaction is, oh, it's just a bit of fun, how would you talk to that person about getting them to understand that actually what they see as really fun is actually quite offensive? How would you talk to that person about being more mindful and sensitive?
So again, there's a few different various ways of having those discussions. One is a really nice way of being able to just sit down and see it from somebody else's perspective. So if I was doing that in a session, I would use something that's called perceptual positions. And it's an amazing exercise to do with somebody where they see it from the other person's perspective. So if I was doing it in a session for myself, and this might be a nice little tool for somebody if they were in that position to do it, where you have 3 chairs or 3 pieces of paper on the floor, and you've got person 1, person 2, person 3, and person 1 is the person giving the banter. So this person then is telling me, right, so how are you perceiving the banter? Well, I'm just having a laugh. I'm just having a laugh, and I'm not seeing it that way at all. And, it's their problem. So then you can move them on to the second piece of paper or chair, and they have to then see it from the perspective of the other crew member. But they have to be the person as well. So they have to pretend to be that person. So then you're asking them the questions. Okay, so what's going on at the moment? Well, I feel a bit offended by the crew member, and he's been giving me banter. And you've got to bring them back. They have to be in the shoes of the other person. So they might want to make that person look quite bad at that time, but they've got to really put themselves in the shoes of the other person. Now, the reason we move positions is that the movement helps to feel, the physical movement helps them to see the perspective as well. So once they've explained it from the other person's perspective, we then move them to position 3, where they're observing position 1 and position 2. So they're observing it from a non-judgmental way, and they're looking at it from quite removed. So then we ask, okay, so what can you see going on for crew member 1? What can you see going on for crew member 2? So crew member 1 was the one that gave the banter, and crew member 2 is the one that's feeling quite sensitive or feeling quite insulted by it. From an observer looking in here, what could you do? What do you think they could do to overcome this? And it's a really wonderful example where you see it from the different perspectives.
And how can we be more inclusive in our workplace communication in the language that we use?
Yeah, so making sure that that inclusive language is the words and phrases used that avoid those biases, the slang and expressions that may discriminate against groups of people based on that race, gender, identity, and being very inclusive, building an inclusive culture is one where people feel they can bring their whole selves to work without fear of discrimination. Identifying commonalities creates a relatable environment in which each person feels included and connected, regardless of apparent differences. We can communicate in a way that everyone understands by using a lot of the tips that we spoke about earlier, and promoting that mutual respect. Passive acceptance of unreasonable attitudes simply helps just to encourage it by having those open dialogues, communication, removing judgments, just respecting other people's differences, and understanding also each other's core values and what's important to the individual, which is highly important. Creating an environment where crew feel comfortable enough to ask for clarification without being ridiculed. Having maybe sentence stems at hand where that there's a common group of sentences that you can use together that is respectable of and inclusive of each other on board the vessel, and challenge bias, not be afraid to constructively challenge each other's perceptions or make them aware of possible inaccuracies in their assumptions in a more of a respectable way, being accountable for our own actions and not to send a message that is acceptable for language to be used, which, someone might find offensive.
It's such an interesting topic, and I think it's so important, that we are talking about this. Yachting, especially, such a diverse group of people working in a very confined space, and the more that we can all remove judgment, show respect, learn from each other, challenge, it's just so important, isn't it?
It's so, so important. And having those open dialogues from the onset and setting those boundaries together from when there's a new team member come on board, is it lovely just to have dinner together and somebody then to chair that dinner to bring our boundaries into play so that we are creating a harmonious culture together where we are strong together. We nurture, we look after each other, and we ensure that we've got each other, we pull each other up, and we talk and we discuss what things mean for each other, which is so important.
So important. A lovely way to end the chat. Thank you so much, Tracey.
Thank you for having me as well.